Good morning to our dear professor, Dr. Leo, and dear classmates. This morning I'm tasked to present to you about the different types of institutions and their impact on policy development. Like any other country, the Philippines is also laden with a lot of problems like inequality in wealth distribution, injustice and criminality, and environmental concerns. It's always easy to blame it on poor governance and poor policies. My readings about this report has led me to solidify my belief that in the case of the Philippines, the reasons for our failure as a nation is not just because of poor governance and poor policy development. Rather, there is a third element to the mix, our institutions. This argument is supported by a series of theories that postulate the critical roles of institutions in policy development. Collectively, they are called institutional theories.
Kingdom's multiple streams framework is a good starting point to explain the institutional theories. This framework suggests that conventional policy development is an interplay of three streams: the problem stream, the political stream, and the policy stream. However, successful policy development will only be achieved if problem brokers actively form part of the policy window. These problem brokers are supposed to be the institutions who have stakes in the policy agenda. To Kingdom's view, the active participation of key institutions in policy making is key to successful policy development. The question now is, which institutions are we referring to? Perhaps, before we point out which institutions are necessary, it will be better to provide a clear definition of the word. In that way, we can establish some context to the argument. Parto in 2005 defines institutions as informal, for example, norms, habits, and customs, semi-formal like mental constructs, models, and rules of the game, and formal like family, corporations, and political parties. Phenomena. Parto further explained that institutions vary with respect to three dimensions. These are level of interrelations, scales of governance, and systems. With respect to levels, institutional relations may be individual, as depicted by examples of our common agreement to being prim and proper when we are in public, organizational, as depicted by our differences in organizational culture, or societal, as in the case of our Muslim brothers or by different ethnic minorities we have in the country. Scales of governance, on the other hand, will refer to how broad the territory of governance is of a given institution. Thus, institutions can be local, like that of a city, or regional, national, international, like the ASEAN, or global, like the World Trade Organization. Lastly, institutions vary in their typology or nature. By this we mean some institutions are political, societal, economic, ecological, cultural, religious, and many more. The dynamics among the levels, scales, and systems of institutions results into the creation of five different types of institutions. Their differences are laid out as a dichotomy, wherein in one end there are institutions that have limited scales, interrelations, and are informal, and institutions that cover wider interrelations, scales of governance, and are more formally structured. Behavioral norms are standardized social habits that are manifested in the activities of individuals and groups as reflections of standard norms. Our tendency to follow road signs or socially accepted norms are part of what we call as behavioral institutions. On the other hand, cognitive institutions are mental constructs, models, or definitions that are embedded in culture. The Christian faith, or principles of any religion for that matter, are examples of cognitive constructs. Associative institutions are mechanisms that facilitate prescribed or privileged interactions among different public and private interests. Non governmental organizations or any pressure groups belong to these kinds of institutions. Regulative institutions will include the police, the judiciary, or any entity which are given the right to prescribe or proscribe behavior. Lastly, for any country, there is always a formal constitution that sets the boundaries and directs the behavior of any entity. Individuals and groups are all under the bounds of the constitution, and are expected to behave accordingly. Now we go back to our original problem. We were once the envy of nations, and now we have reduced our country to abject poverty, divisiveness, and lack of direction. And how is it that even such a country like Vietnam, which was torn by war in the 70s, have managed to transform themselves economically, politically, and socially while still maintaining their cultural and national identity? To be honest, our institutions have failed us. Our families, schools, churches, pressure groups, and government institutions are riddled with self interest instead of common good, proliferation of half truths and misinformation to protect and promote their own personal agenda. The involvement of institutions to policy making has been reduced to assuring short term personal gains instead of preserving and promoting national interests. At worst, critical institutions are not even represented in policy making. Our divisiveness has also led us to be notoriously envious and destructive to others. The problem has gone so rampant that the term crab mentality is already embedded in our culture. Instead of engaging in healthy institutional practices such as reinforcement and collaboration, our institutions have chosen bickering and self righteousness as the main arsenal for survival. But not all is lost. If only our institutions carry the Lycean ideals pro Deo et Patria, there will be a brighter tomorrow for the Filipino. Until then, we can only hope that our institutions will work for common good, be driven by faith in God and love for humanity. Thank you very much.